remember the first time you met Roy Edward Disney?
I remember the first time I met his car, because that's the first thing I saw, and it was probably back in the 70s actually, when he was at the studio, and he had the best car and the best parking space, like right under the sheds at the studio at the time. And actually the first time I saw him, I think he was actually riding a bike around the studio a lot, because he would do that, and you think, God, who's that guy on a bike? And people would say, oh, that's Roy Disney. You go, no, Roy Disney would never ride a bike. But he was on one of the big balloon tire bikes, like going from here to editorial and over to see his friend and have lunch with Stormy or something like that. So I didn't meet him or get to know him till years later, but it was that kind of experience where you go, oh, he's just one of us. He looked kind of like a traffic messenger, like he was going to drop some envelopes off, and it was Roy.
When you started working at the studio, Roy was still on the board of directors, but then he had sort of stepped out of the company. He felt like the company was a little bit lost, but he was still on the board, and then he resigned from the board. Can you talk a little bit about that? And did you know him well enough to be able to communicate with him when he resigned? And
well, in the 70s and 80s, I didn't know him that well. I mean, he probably knew my name, and that was about it. And of course, we all know who he was. And he was a real silent participant in the company. He was on the board. It was run by Ron Miller at the time. So he was there, and he was, as it turns out, very observant about the company. And I think that's when Roy sat up and took notice and ended up just saying, get me out of here. I have to do something dynamic to make a difference, or at least show the shareholders that I care, and really show the employees that he cared. So I don't know that we got it on the first day when he said, I'm resigning from the board. You go, oh, well, that's too bad. What's going on? And then in the ensuing weeks, it became really apparent that there was a big deal happening, and it was scary. It could have very, very easily, had he not been there, been in a position to have the company broken apart. And it was almost packaged like that, not intentionally by anyone, but the name had been sold off, Walt Disney's name, and some of Retlaw had been packaged separately, and the parks were easily broken off of the film division. The film division was trying to restart itself with Touchstone Films and that kind of thing, but faltering a little bit. So it could have been disastrous.
At the end of that whole period, Roy came back rather triumphantly to the company. I remember there was a photo of him and the mat that we all signed, and it circulated the animation department. It was kind of a welcome home type of thing. I
think so. I mean, animation was small. There was maybe 200 people entirely, if you even add up ink and paint. So a really small department. And that was when we all got to know Roy a lot more. He wasn't on the board anymore in our eyes. So he returned to the board, but also returned to the hallways. So Roy was walking the hallways with us, coming into rooms, saying hello, looking at storyboards, and just kind of like a coach. It wasn't like he was coming and giving hard notes as an executive. He was coming in to encourage and give us self-confidence, because he always thought if we believed that we could do it, we could do it. And he turned out to be right.
He always was sort of a very thoughtful person, and didn't normally, and somewhat of a shy person at the same time. He didn't like to talk a lot in front of groups, especially when he started coming to some of those story meetings and some of those screenings. But you would then get a couple pages of notes from him after the fact.
Oh, exactly. He was a really good writer, and I mean that because of the notes that came out of it. I think if you did a personality test, like a Myers-Briggs personality study on Roy, he would be the classic introvert. Very thoughtful, very intuitive, and very hard to bring out in a room or a party situation. His wife Patty was really that to him. Patty was his extrovert. And so he would sit in a room full of people, executives, Michael Eisner, whoever it was, filmmakers, and he would participate, but with 3 words here and 2 words there and a nod there. And then, the next day or that night, you would get beautifully written paragraphs of prose that talked about what he felt. And it was never imposing, but it was just, this really didn't work for me, and you really could use a map there. He was always a very logical guy. And he always asked for a map, which was kind of funny because he was a sailor, but he always felt like, I don't know our logistics, and Belle leaves the house and she finds Philippe, and we need to put in some sort of geography. And he was very thoughtful about things that a lot of times we hadn't thought about.
You mentioned Belle. What was, can you relay some stories about Roy being in some of those story meetings or coming for some screenings on Beauty and the Beast? Because that really was, a pivotal movie.
Yeah, it was. I think we moved off the lot in 84 probably, and 85. The memo went out in 84 maybe. And Roy, Roy agreed to get us off the lot and set us up. And I moved everybody over there to the new building and got everybody set up. And he was there on the first day, and he sent over potted plants and, sheet cakes and whatever he sent over, just to say, listen, I know you're in a parking lot in a warehouse in another city, but my last name's Disney and I'll take care of you. And we believed him, and he lived up to his word, which was nice. So it's always great to have him around. Yeah, certainly Howard Ashman and Alan Menken were just like pounding away on Little Mermaid at the time. We were all really jazzed about that because we had never had composers like that since the Sherman Brothers, probably. So to have Alan and Howard in there writing plot inside the lyrics of their songs was really exciting. And on Beauty and the Beast, we were really jealous, actually. So we thought, oh, it'd be great to work with them, but we're not. Finally, we had a blow up on Beauty and the Beast, and actually Roy and Patty came to London. We were working in London for about 9 months on Beauty and the Beast with Richard Purdom, who is a Canadian filmmaker who had a studio in London. He was a protege of Richard Williams, the animator who had done Roger Rabbit. So kind of all part of the family, and Richard and his wife Jill were developing Beauty and the Beast. And Roy came over with Patty. We showed him boards, and it was our A-team. We had Glenn Keane, we had Andreas Deja, we had Hans Bacher, we had so many good people there. And we went through all the storyboards, probably in 45 minutes. Here's a wolf chase, he runs out, he does this. And at the time, the movie was very earthbound. It was very kind of live action-y, so there weren't any enchanted characters. If they were, they floated around and didn't speak. And it was very European and moody and kind of nice, but just not very Disney. And so Roy, in his typical ways, just said, okay, great, thank you, great, good work, everybody, good work. And then I walked him out to the street, and he said, that was really dull. It's like, that was dull as dishwater. So I went up and everybody said, how'd it go? Did he like it? I said, yeah, he loves, great. And then so Roy, came back, and within a couple of weeks, we went down to Florida to meet Roy and Jeffrey, and it wasn't punitive at all. It was just honest. And there's a big difference. So it was like, guys, it's time to fish or cut bait, which was Jeffrey's quote after we showed it with Roy there, because he agreed. And we eventually, dumped that version of the movie, and Richard ended up moving on, making some other choices in his career, and we brought in new directors, Kirk Wise, Gary Trousdale. And at the time, Mermaid came out, and it was this huge hit, and we got Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, and it was like, yes, we got the Mermaid guys. Then the big flop sweat was, are we going to live up to Mermaid? That was such a perfect movie, and not an extra frame in it. But Howard and Alan turned on the steam, and they went to this kind of afterburner stage in their career and delivered some amazing songs for us. And I can't say that made it easy, but when you have Ashman and Menken writing these tentpole songs for your movie, and your job is to connect the dots, it made it a lot easier.
That was one of the things about Roy, was that he wouldn't sit in a room with a bunch of people, look at a bunch of boards being pitched, and then say, that was terrible.
No.
Yeah, he was always he always had a really terrific demeanor about being respectful to the artists and being reserved in front of a large group, but privately would be very honest.
Yeah, really honest. And I think he was deferential too, because he would say this in the room, that it's like, I'm not the creative, I'm not the writer. He didn't feel like he had a tremendous amount of creative chops necessarily, but in the end he did. In the end he had a good instinct about what wasn't working. He may not have had the solution to fix it, but particularly on Fantasia 2000 later on, he would be pretty honest with us in the room, which we admired. And then we would go away and fix things based on what he felt was working or not working. So he had a good instinct for it. And he was an editor after all. He's had a really good instinct for editing and for the flow and the music of a movie. So every once in a while I think, well, what was the secret, if there was one, about our successes back then? And by back then I mean, like, there was this wonderful golden age of animation in the 80s and 90s, and that has carried on even today, and was the genesis of a really wonderful animation studio right now. And to me, it was Roy Disney, because he was the guy who not only came in and said, okay, wait, everybody, I'll take animation while you're messing with the studio, and you go, play with Bette Midler and have a good time. Let's do something at the core of the company that's called animation, and I'm going to throw my body in front of the train and make great movies. And he did, and he delivered on his promise. And he was a quiet participant. He would go live his life. He'd be able to go out and sail and do his philanthropy, but he would always be there, and he would always come back. And he was like, like in Dumbo, he has the magic feather, and he can fly, but he doesn't know it. And he was our magic feather. Roy was our magic feather. And eventually, sadly, we lost him, and now we've kind of learned we can fly on our own. but it's only because Roy was our magic feather for so long that we could do that. So it's great. It's great we're finally memorializing him in a book, because he's the kind of guy that was a quiet, kind of back of the room participant, not the kind of guy to take the spotlight, not to go out in front of the filmmakers, not to take credit. And so to come back now a few years later and remember him and celebrate his life and celebrate what he did for all of us, because we all owe our jobs and families and welfare to this guy in no small order, is a real treat. So if you get a chance, buy Dave Bossert's book called in the shop right now on board. So have a good time, ride the water slide, see you later.
Fantastic. That was great, huh?
That was one. We can do more, but that's...
I think there's enough air. We can clip that at the end if we need to.
Water slide, yes.
Yes. So, let's go back just a little bit before Beauty and the Beast and back to when the takeover was in process and Roy interceded and was able to bring in a new management team. That new management team, these guys were seasoned, film veterans, executives, but they didn't know anything about animation. And you said Roy threw himself in front of the train, and really when they came in, they were going to shut down animation, and it was Roy that said, "No, I'm going to take animation, and we're going to go off and do something with it." So,
yeah, it was really interesting. I had a chance to interview Roy and Jeffrey Katzenberg and some players when I was making Disney's Waking Sleeping Beauty, available now in the gift store, and Roy really was the guy who did a number of amazing things in the middle 80s. I don't know what was in the drinking water at Roy's house, but he came in and had the foresight to be able to say, it doesn't have to be run by one guy. There's no more Walt Disneys. Let's make this a team effort. So first of all, he said, there's no more Walt Disney. We don't have to operate the company by trying to rediscover what this man wanted. That's not a way to operate a company. Let's go out and find somebody interesting. And in Michael Eisner and Frank Wells, he found the modern day kind of Walt and Roy, the creative business mixture. And he also found two great improvisational creative entrepreneurs in somebody like Frank Wells, who really didn't have to work another day in his life because he'd rather be out climbing mountains. He loved Disney. Michael Eisner always wanted to work for Disney. And they had an amazing run here. And it was really Roy that put them in place and then said, we trust you, go do greatness. I know animation, I know these guys, I'll go hang out with them. And he did, and we were floundering at the time. We had made some movies that were less than great. In fact, when he made that change in management at the company in the mid-80s, we were working, you and I, on a movie called The Black Cauldron. We all put our best effort in that movie, and it's not the worst movie ever made, I promise you. If it ever comes out, take a look. Full of good work, but kind of misplaced conscientiousness. It was a lot of good work in service of a pretty bad story. Eventually, over the years, we kind of grew the department into doing movies like Great Mouse Detective, and then Oliver and Company go, oh, this is kind of good. And then there was competition on the outside, and all of a sudden American Tail comes out from another studio, and Disney was in second place, and that couldn't happen. So Roy shows up and says, we're in this to win. We're going to win. And we won. We stepped up pretty quick to the Little Mermaids and the Beauty and the Beasts and the Aladdins and even movies that may not have fired off at the box office like Rescuers Down Under. It's a great movie with a lot of really interesting work and the first digital movie made in Hollywood. So you look at the box office and go, oh, Rescuers Down Under. It's a groundbreaking technical movie. And you know who signed the check for that? Roy Disney. So you have these contributions that maybe aren't apparent in box office figures or whatever, but you have this guy behind the scenes, kind of a puppet master, working things back and forth to our benefit. We didn't know it all the time, and he was covering our back.
Yeah, it's funny, you mentioned Rescuers Down Under. It was the first digitally inked and painted movie that we had done, and it was because of the cap system. Can you talk a little bit about Roy's inquisitiveness with technology? He loved technology, and he was a big proponent of pushing technology within animation.
Yeah, I always thought of Roy Disney as an adventurer, and that's probably what most people don't think of him as. But he was. When he was on an airplane flying to a sailing ship somewhere, he was like a 10-year-old kid. I mean, really. I remember one time being next to him on the airplane, and he had a whole book about, it was called Latitude, about telling time on the high seas and how the sailors were able to, take clocks out. And he was so into this and into the technology of life, past, present, and future, a history buff. So when it came to being at the cutting edge of animation, he was all over it. And certainly the studio with the multiplane camera and other things had been innovative in the past, but like 40 years past, not a lot had happened in that recent time. So Roy again gave us his confidence, I suppose, to say, well, let's bring in some interesting people. Let's bring in some computer graphics people, some hardware people. Let's hire the Pixar company, who at the time was making machines for medical scanning and doing Listerine commercials and things. They make a lovely black box. Let's put it with this other black box. We can plug those together. And people like Lem Davis and Bob Lambert came in and created these amazing systems for us. The first in the industry to make Rescuers Down Under the first digital film in the industry. So go out to the movies today, see a movie, it's shot and projected digitally, most likely. You can look back at Rescuers Down Under, and you can look back at Roy Disney and say, oh, well, he was the first guy to do that.
You did Beauty and the Beast. It became the first animated picture to be nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. We went on to create Aladdin, and it seemed like there was this succession that was never stopping. And then you did Lion King. You talk a little bit about Lion King, Roy's involvement, because of the fact that he really loved nature. He made those nature movies, and also I think you can tie into this, going back to Beauty and the Beast. The octopus and the inspiration for Ursula, and did he have a similar influence and inspiration on The Lion King?
Yeah. Well, you can't help but work with somebody like Roy without knowing a lot about him, and we all knew he sailed even though we hadn't been on his boat, and you all knew kind of what his interests were, and he had this whole career doing nature, like true life adventures for the studio. And so we had this constant love of nature, and it was always talking about let's do an IMAX movie about the peregrine falcon, and let's take an endangered species and highlight it. And it was always talking about those ideas in one way or another. So when we got to movies like Beauty and the Beast, or even Lion King, where we really had animals that had to be portrayed in a real way, he would say like, oh, let's bring in those Mutual of Omaha Wild Kingdom guys like Jim Fowler. We'd call up Jim Fowler. Jim Fowler comes in with a 900-pound lion, and you sit there and you're drawing a lion with Roy standing there and Jim Fowler, and you get a sense of the weight and the breadth and the kind of size of their paws, and that makes it into the movie. So in these indirect ways, I think his passion for animals and adventure and wildlife kind of makes it into these movies. Not directly. Roy doesn't sit there and say, we're going to make a movie about lions because I like lions. That's not his manner. His manner is more, here's how I live my life, and here's what I enjoy. I enjoy adventure, I enjoy travel, I enjoy sailing, I enjoy animals. I think it's important that we give back. I think it's important that we do philanthropy in areas of cancer research and animal give back and all. And you see, oh, as a role model for me, he's living his life this way, I can do that too. And I think that was inspiring to us. And we sent our guys off to Africa to do research, and the idea of adventure, travel, and animation, which would have at one time been an oxymoron, was actually something important to these movies, because the minute you went to Australia for Rescuers Down Under or Africa for Lion King, you saw the red dirt, you felt the air, you saw the storms coming, and you knew what that was. And that made it into the movie in a big way.
And I think you said something very interesting that made me realize, I mean, and just sort of sparked that idea that Roy understood his Uncle Walt's genius, which was don't repeat yourself, do things of good quality, and continue to always innovate.
Yeah.
And that's really was his philosophy, but he also didn't forsake the past.
Yeah.
He wanted to make sure that the ARL we preserved the artwork, and he was very much interested in preserving the history of the company.
It's a really good point. Yeah, it's really good. He felt like you could be innovative and push forward without forsaking the past, that you could preserve and protect and defend your history, but you didn't have to manage the company that way. You didn't have to say, okay, well, Walt really thought that we had to make this many movies and this style of movie, and he didn't think that at all. He was very brave about throwing out any of that, but he was also brave about saying, let's invest a lot of money, millions of dollars, into preserving our art collection so that the world can see it and so that it can be around for generations to come. And then let's go ahead and look through our businesses and see where we can expand or where we can do better work. And he was all about quality. It's like not worth doing to him if it wasn't at the highest possible quality. And whether we lived up to that or not, the audience really has to judge. But I think at times during our tenure at Disney, we probably did, for moments, live up to that high quality standard. A little bit in Fantasia 2000, I think we did, and maybe in portions of movies we did. I'm not sure we lived up to Pinocchio and some of things that were my hero movies. But you know what? Roy always thought we could. He never doubted for a second. He thought, you'll make your own Pinocchio, and it'll be better. Really? I mean, no, we're like kids from Cal Arts. We can't do that. No, you can do that. And so that believing was so much a part of what Roy was. That kind of guy who came in and said, oh, you can do it. I'll be back in 2 weeks, and you'll show me. Goodbye. And we worked our little bottoms off to prove him right.
You mentioned Cal Arts, and that was the brainchild of Walt, and the first fundraiser for Cal Arts was the premiere of Mary Poppins in 1964. Mm-hmm. Walt didn't live to see the groundbreaking of that dream, but his brother Roy Oliver moved that forward and got that school built, and Roy E. was probably I think one of the longest serving members of the board of trustees on Cal Arts.
Yeah, Roy always felt that you had to, as part of society, you had to give back. And that meant philanthropy, that meant education, and he felt also that Disney had a unique take on animation and personality animation. So over the years, as a board member of Cal Arts, he was always sure that the original idea of Cal Arts, by having Mark Davis and various people come out and set up the curriculum and train and be able to have artists cross-pollinate with dancers, cross-pollinate with musicians, that was a pretty brave vision. We're used to it now, a lot of schools do that, but at the time that was not the case. You would go to a music academy and study that. You would go to a dance school and study that. So to mix all those together was complex, it was politically complex, it was financially complex. I think that school probably would have gone under several times had it not been for Roy's influence and going out and saying, no, this is important not just to our company, but to the community. It was important when you see the Red Cat Theater down at the Walt Disney Concert Hall, named after Roy's parents, and you get this sense of how important the arts are to a surviving, vital culture. And he was a historian. He saw that in the Greeks. He saw that in the Romans, in Europe, in Holland, in different eras. And he saw that if we were going to be a great country and a great motion picture company, we had to give back to culture. And that's where Cal Arts, his support for that really came from.
He actually used to tell a very, very funny story back in the 70s. I'm doing a sidebar here, guys, sorry. But they had a meeting at the then president of Cal Arts at the home in Encino. Yeah. And one of the professors took all his clothes off. Did you ever hear him tell that story?
Sadly, no.
So Roy said that here was this professor from Cal Arts, this instructor, and they were in a heated argument. The guy stripped down naked, and he was standing in the middle of all the trustees completely naked, and I said, well, what did you do? He goes, we just continued the meeting. Yeah. It was like nothing was going on.
It's kind of funny because every Cal Arts story ends that way.
Yeah, there's some sort of nudity
we were
involved.
graduation and somebody stripped down naked. It's always the same thing. Yeah. I remember the roast we did for him after Fantasia 2000. We went to the 21 Club, and everybody stood up and kind of roasted Roy. And one of the funniest jokes was Roy was always the arbiter of taste for the company, and these products would come in like cooking with poo. And you can't do that. Or Disney's Meat Club, steaks and chops in the shape of your favorite Disney characters. So he would be the one that like red X through those things. And we always wondered why his boat was named Pyewacket, and we eventually found out. But our theory was that Pyewacket was loosely translated a Welsh word that meant "what the hell were we drinking on the night that we named this boat?" So,
can you tell me one sort of favorite memory that just when you think of Roy that pops into your head, and what you miss about him most?
I miss Roy most because of his stories. He was the most amazing kind of raconteur when it came to telling travel stories, and he would go on and on. But one time that sticks out in particular was we were in New York and we were filming Fantasia 2000, and I was directing the host sequences. And we were with Itzhak Perlman. So Itzhak Perlman shows up, and we're on a tiny stage about the size of this. And we put him on a chair, and he has a Stradivarius violin that he brings out. It's worth several $1 million. The bow is worth more than my house. He brings it out of the case and starts playing, and he's playing Elvis songs. It's Perlman playing Elvis songs on his violin. And Roy starts singing along, and it was Heartbreak Hotel. Since my baby left me. And at the same time, the craft services table was over here, and Roy had a hot dog in his hand because his wife wouldn't let him eat hot dogs, and he kept saying, "Don't tell Patty." And he grabbed a hot dog, and he was eating it, singing Heartbreak Hotel with Itzhak Perlman playing a $2 million Stradivarius guitar. And I said, how did I get here? If time travel had dropped me into that moment, I would have not believed it. And it was one of the best times of my life.
Talk a little bit more about Roy's influence around the company, because in essence, he, when he decided to go all in, which was what his expression was, and save the company, it was a $2 to $3 billion company.
Yeah.
And now we're at $90 to $100 billion company.
Yeah.
And it's because of him.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, the company, when Roy came in 1984, he had been involved in the company for his whole life. So it wasn't like he was new to the company, but what always surprised all of us was how quick he was to want to discard things and innovate. Because you would think, oh, he's Roy Disney, he's going to want to do it the way his uncle did, the way his dad did, and let's just keep it the same way. We don't want to change it. Let's make it a museum. He was the first one to say, it's not a museum. You can't run your company this way. He was the first one to bring in some guys that knew the movie business. And he was one of the first ones to say, he brought in some great white-knighted investors into the company, and they said, you got to develop your real estate. And he was saying, well, let's put in these great themed resorts. We've always talked about building an African hotel or whatever. Let's finish these places and put in really interesting destination resorts for people, and build vacation clubs where people can come and enjoy it. All that sense of adventure and that sense of, let's not, to use a Sunday school term, hide our light under a bushel. Let's just take this amazing thing we have called Disney and rip the covers off of it and shine it bright for everybody and say, oh, with Disney, we could build a theme park in Japan, and it could be about the seas, and we could put a ship on. In fact, we put 4 ships out on the high seas. That kind of sense of spirit and adventure came in a really subtle, understated way from Roy Disney. And I really believe that. So if you're cruising around the ship, enjoying your meal in a restaurant that's entertaining you and watching a show, you're doing it because in no small way Roy Disney thought you should, and that Disney wasn't something to be limited to Anaheim or limited to the movie screen. It's something you could take home with you. It's something you could go visit around the world. And that sense of adventure, that sense of love of animals turned into the animal kingdom in Florida. So a lot of that kind of quiet whispering behind the scenes came from Roy as a role model for all of us, for not only how to live your life, but how Disney as a company could be limitless. And I think in many ways now it is. I think it's a pretty amazing company that's grown from this little $2 billion entity up to, sports and Lucasfilm and Marvel and all these places now that are kind of living the dream bigger than any of us ever thought it could be. And a lot of that is the confidence that Roy Disney gave to us.